Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Best Games Period. This week we have an honorable mention for you. That wasn't in the plan, but as so often happens in life, sometimes things don't go according to plan. And yes, I'm actually recording this on Monday, the very day it is supposed to be going out. Apologies for that. Everything's just kind of crazy in the lead up to both a special project we're working on and also in the lead up to Thanksgiving. So I appreciate your patience and cutting me a little bit of slack. This week we're actually going to talk about the Banner Saga on honorable mentions because I love it's a game that I love. I think it's really great. I do think that there are just some things that kind of hold it back, and unfortunately I don't feel like those things were really addressed in the sequel, the Banner Saga 2, but I have high hopes for the third installment, which I believe is on the way. Stoic Games might be launching a Kickstarter for that one. I'm not sure if that has already happened or is in the process of being worked out, but yeah, the Banner Saga is really interesting. So essentially what led up to the creation of the Banner Saga is that this group of developers from BioWare broke off, and I think this was probably around the time Mass Effect 3 was coming out, if I remember correctly. And it's not like a big group either. It was only like 3-ish people, I believe. These developers in particular had worked on Star Wars The Old Republic, and their names were Alex Thomas, Arnie Jorgensen, and John Watson. Yes, the John Watson from Sherlock Holmes. That was a terrible joke. Why did I make that? Gosh, I need other people on this show to help me censor myself. Essentially, they launched this Kickstarter for their vision of the Banner Saga, and what they proposed in the Kickstarter was that it was going to be this, hand-painted, beautifully illustrated adventure through this unique take on Norse mythology. And a lot of what they showed was really impressive. They had these just gorgeous animated cutscenes and these sprawling vistas of beautiful artistic bleakness, I guess you could say, and it was really captivating, and it ended up finding quite a bit of success on Kickstarter. I believe they met their fundraising goal within a day, and they have, with Kickstarter you have like an entire month to raise money, so they ended up raising like 7 times what they were actually trying to raise initially, and of course, that led to some expansion of scope, shall we say. So they ended up releasing the game 2 years later, in 2014, and it was not quite what a lot of people had thought was gonna... How do I say this? It was very, very good, but it didn't have quite the same... I think a lot of people were expecting more of the animation and the cutscenes, and there wasn't really a ton of that. And again, in retrospect, that probably should have been expected just because of the size of the team and all that, but their Kickstarter pitch was just so strong that a lot of people had these incredibly unrealistic expectations of what the Banner Saga was going to be. And actually, prior to releasing the full game, they released this, teaser demo multiplayer thing called the Banner Saga Factions, which was basically just showcasing the combat system that they had put together for the Banner Saga. And it was, and it's free. I think it's still free to this day. You can actually download that for free and kind of check it out and see if the combat of the Banner Saga is up your alley. But I guess the best way to describe the Banner Saga is that it is like Oregon Trail, if the Oregon Trail was happening during the apocalypse and you had to have turn-based battles to decide pivotal conflicts. And that's such a cool idea. I love it. And essentially you're playing as this group of refugees and from the far north, and you're and it actually kind of bounces around to different groups of refugees, but the core story is about this northern group of refugees under the leadership of this guy named Rook, and he has a daughter named Alette, and they love each other very much. And their goal is just to get everyone, as many people from the town, southward as possible, because there is this oncoming army of these creatures called the Dredge. And Dredge are kind of these stone golem-type creatures. They're kind of mysterious. People don't really know a whole lot about them. They don't talk a lot. And the Dredge usually keep to the far frozen wastelands in the north, but for some reason they are coming southward, and they are not stopping for anything. They are just rolling through towns and cities and just killing off folk, and it's basically like the end of the world for these people, which is ironic because it's actually the end of the world. As Rook and his people flee south, they kind of pick up more people from around this realm that have found themselves displaced by the Dredge, and they include creatures called Varl, and the Varl are basically these horned giants, and they are super strong and brave, and I believe they're also basically immortal, but they can be killed, and they also can't reproduce anymore. So there is a constantly dwindling number of Varl in the world, and along with the Varl, they encountered these magic users, people like Juno, who's kind of this mysterious weaver of magic. Initially, this group is kind of aiming for these different strongholds, and like they're trying to find any place that is safe, some place that they can finally rest. And every time they find a new safe haven, within a matter of days there is a calamity, either the Dredge or as we kind of see alluded to throughout the game, there is a giant serpent, this world-eating serpent, and that obviously comes heavily inspired by Norse mythology. This game that obviously comes from the Nidhogg, the world eater, and you see it just consume entire cities, and it is cracking the world apart, and it's really it's a really interesting game, really, really cool visuals, really amazing ideas, and I think this first game actually gets the storytelling aspect pretty spot on. And you can play the Banner Saga with permadeath, like people can just like die and they're gone forever. You can play it with kind of the difficulty turned down, where if people die on the battlefield, they're just injured and they come back. But it's really interesting combining kind of this high stakes turn-based combat with this more role-playing-y Oregon Trail-like decision making of kind of trying to figure out how to get through with the most people left alive possible. So people, so for example, you have a choice. Almost every time you go into combat, you can do something that would sacrifice some of the people in your caravan, but spare you some difficulty in the fight, or you can do something super risky in the fight and just like charge headlong into battle and save as many people as possible, but it's going to put you at a disadvantage for the actual combat. And it's all really, the combat itself is actually really solid. Basically, characters have armor and they have health, and how much health they have determines how much damage they do. But that damage is mitigated by armor. So if you have more armor than someone has health, then if they are attacking your health directly, they're only going to do like 1 damage. If you have, but you can also choose to target armor, and so you can take an enemy's armor down to 0, and then all the damage you do to them is direct. And also there are a bunch of different classes, like you have archers, you have fighters, you have Varl, you have these magic users, and they all have their different abilities that help out in combat, and you need to use them very strategically to kind of get the upper hand. And it's actually it's a system that works very well. And to use special abilities, you have to use this inspiration, I guess. And inspiration, you get it by attacking and taking damage, and so the more you basically are involving yourself in combat, the more access you have to special moves. Alternatively, you can use that inspiration to do additional damage, and I believe unless you're using like specific abilities, every time you attack you hit. So it's a highly strategic gameplay mode, and I found it very satisfying. And I've talked a little bit about the visuals in the Banner Saga, but I also really want to give a shout out to Austin Wintory, who we've mentioned on this show a couple times now because he's a very prolific video game composer, and he's very, very talented. And once upon a time, he was actually going to make an appearance on the podcast, and hopefully we can wrangle him again someday, because that would be amazing. I want to hear what games he really loves playing and what he thinks is a best game, period. But his soundtrack for the Banner Saga is just perfect. Like, it's not flashy, it's not something that was nominated for a Grammy, obviously, but it's perfect for the game that it is made for. It is kind of this low-key Norse chanting dirge. Like, it is a soundtrack that conveys sadness and loss, and also hope and the willingness to fight. It's just very, I think it's one of maybe his less appreciated soundtracks, but I do think it is one of his best. If you are looking for a refreshing RPG to kind of dig your teeth into and like just a really engaging battle system, I think the Banner Saga is really great. And especially because I've talked a lot about these kind of large concepts like, oh, there's a giant world-eating dragon thing. Oh, there are these immortal giant creatures. Oh, the stone golems are invading. With all of that craziness going on, it is very much still rooted in characters and character relationships and dynamics. And a lot of the most important decisions you make throughout the course of the Banner Saga have to do with your fighting companions, the people you fight alongside with. You know, some of them aren't 100% trustworthy. Some of them have different agendas going on. And a lot of the time you have to make different decisions that might, cause them to join you or leave. And that's kind of the constant, I want to say stress, but that's not quite the right word I want to go for. But the constant, need to keep everyone together is a really good, they really toe the line. It's a really interesting dynamic that you don't see in a whole lot of games. And on top of all of that, like, it's unique. Like, how like, you have Oregon Trail, you have that entire series of kind of educational games, and then you have like that's kind of a small subgenre that you don't really see surface very often, but you have you've kind of seen it more in recent years, and I think you can probably point to the Banner Saga as a point of where this subgenre resurfaced. And since the Banner Saga came out, you've seen stuff like Death Road to Canada, The Last Train, I think, might be considered something along the lines of a Oregon Trail-like, if I can use that term, that is terrible and should obviously have a different, more succinct name. But yeah, it's a good character-driven RPG that also has just fantastic world building. Like, there are lots of different monuments and places that you see throughout your time in the Banner Saga that hint at this much larger world, this much deeper world that you never really see explored in the game. But from what's there, I'm like 99% sure the developers fleshed out a lot more of this world, and they're just kind of itching and waiting to throw it all on the table for the next couple installments. And to a degree, you do see that in the Banner Saga 2. My main problem with the second one is that it felt, playing through the game, the story beats feel rushed, and they didn't quite fit together super well. It felt like the team was under a lot of pressure to get that game out as soon as possible. Which, I mean, to their credit, they got it out like 2 years after the Banner Saga released. So, and I just remembered the Kickstarter for the Banner Saga 3 actually has succeeded. It launched earlier this year and raised twice what they were asking for, so that's amazing. I'm super looking forward to actually seeing a third installment, because I was kind of afraid after the second one the series might stall out. But I have a lot of faith in Stoic. They're a small developer that I'm really interested in seeing kind of where they go, and maybe the Banner Saga, is kind of what they're committed to, and like the world that they are committed to bringing to life for a gaming audience. But I'm sure they could make other kinds of games, other kinds of story, narrative-driven games that would be just as amazing, because, man, the presentation, and I cannot stress enough how good and beautiful the Banner Saga is. It is just a treat to look at. Like, any single still from the Banner Saga looks like something you could just throw on a poster and it would look amazing. It would be a great piece of art to hang in your house. So I've said a lot of really great things. The things that kind of fall apart in the Banner Saga relate more towards they relate towards the story itself, I think, and that's kind of where the series has stumbled, like I was mentioning with the Banner Saga 2. The Banner Saga feels like it needed more breathing room, and it leaves you wanting a lot more and a lot of answers to questions, but it does end on a very solid emotional beat. But by the end, while satisfying, the game leaves you feeling kind of confused, and it feels slightly incomplete. Like there are maybe some pieces that had to be removed for the sake of time or budget, and while that's unfortunate, and I totally understand it, given the realities of game development, and what we have is very great and amazing, I'm hopeful that the Banner Saga 3 can kind of take that one step further and kind of just give us a concrete, fully fleshed out narrative, because as it is in the Banner Saga, the main emotional linchpin of everything centers around how the player feels about the relationship between Rook and Alette. And there's some... Obviously, there are other characters that are very interesting, but they don't really get a whole lot of time to shine as much as the Rook-Alette relationship. And I feel like that's kind of a shame, especially when a lot of the core drama relates around whether or not these characters are going to stick with you or leave or fight you or whatever. And so having more time to just let the entire cast kind of come into their own, kind of like a Fire Emblem game where all the characters kind of have their own quirks and backstories and have their chance to kind of shine while bouncing off the other characters. I think that would probably go a long ways towards making the Banner Saga better, or the Banner Saga 3 better, because as it is, you just kind of get these isolated moments with Rook and another person. You never really get... you don't get a whole lot of character moments between the other members of the refugee party. It's mostly just Rook and whoever, rather than whoever and whoever. You know, both classic characters, whoever. And all that being said, the final emotional beat gives players kind of this final decision that is actually, built up throughout the game, and by the end feels very meaningful. And it's probably, since that initial that decision of choosing who lives and who dies in Mass Effect, the original Mass Effect, I had to actually kind of sit and think about my response to kind of this ethical question, and it was rough. And there are very few games that have made me kind of like sit back and be like, whoa, I need to think about this for a second. But the Banner Saga does that, and I think along with everything else, I think whenever a game can give you a moment like that, there's something really good going on a fundamental level. So I would highly recommend anyone interested in the Banner Saga pick that up. If you're not really sure if the turn-based combat is for you, because honestly that's probably the deciding factor as to whether or not you're going to enjoy your time with the Banner Saga 2, consider downloading the Banner Saga factions from Steam. You might be out of luck if you're kind of a console gamer. I think they only have I don't think they have factions on any of the consoles, but they do have the Banner Saga on PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PCs. So, give it a shot if you're looking for something, because it's real great, real good. I like it. And with that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Extra Life. Now, I know a lot of people might be thinking, Extra Life, but Game Day just happened. People raised over $9 million for sick and injured kids. Well, you know what? Here's a secret. You can actually fundraise until the end of the year to contribute to your local Children's Miracle Network hospital. So all you need to do is go over to extra-life.org, and you can actually sign up if you haven't, and select a local children's hospital or a children's hospital that's kind of near and dear to your heart, and you can actually play games and raise money for the hospital from now until the end of the year, and it will still count to this year's total, and you can still get a bunch of really cool goodies, like I think you can get some XSplit months. You can, sign up. I think if you pay an extra $15 during registration, if you raise $200, you get a cool T-shirt. A bunch of really cool stuff. I think you also get a massive discount on these really cool Extra Life wooden cases if you raise a certain amount of money. So highly recommend you check that out. And if you want to get involved on the community end of things, you can head over to community.extra-life.org, where you can find a lot of different people coming together to raise money for sick and injured kids. You can get more questions answered from different members of the community. You can also meet people maybe in your local area who would be more than happy to help you in your endeavor to raise money for sick kids. So there's really no downside in going over to the community site. Plus, you can find this very podcast over on community.extra-life.org. And you can even find a bunch of really interesting articles about what's going on in gaming. I know there was an article over there that I wrote. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain hawking his own stuff. But there's a really, really cool thing I learned about the other day, is that they're making a Jurassic Park board game, and there's also going to be a Fight Club card game. I don't know how those are going to work, but I know that they are being made by Mondo, and Mondo makes some pretty neat stuff. So, and that's not a paid endorsement or anything. That's just me saying that Mondo does actually make some good stuff. And if Mondo, if you want to throw some money towards the upkeep of this podcast, I'm more than willing to keep telling people that you make good stuff. Anyway, that said, if you want to follow the podcast, you can follow us on Twitter @bestgamesperiod. You tweet at us, and we will tweet back, or we'll give you a shout out on the show, or give us feedback. We always like feedback. You can also find us on iTunes, where we always appreciate a review that helps us kind of become more visible. And you can also find us on Libsyn, SoundCloud, and we have a Patreon. And basically, this podcast does cost money to kind of keep up, and we appreciate any of our listeners who are willing to throw in like $1 a month to help us kind of keep afloat and keep this thing going. And for that $1 a month, you get access to audio extras. Sometimes we have tangents that don't quite fit into normal episodes, or sometimes we go way over time and we need to cut out like 10 to 20 minutes of conversation, and it's still good conversation, and so we put it up on Patreon. And occasionally we'll do full episodes. We did a rhyme spoiler cast. We did an episode on the original Super Mario Brothers anime from the 1980s, which was one of the first video game movies ever. And it's bonkers, so I highly recommend you listen to that. And yeah, I think that's about it. So next week we should be back with an episode about Banjo-Kazooie, which I'm pretty excited to talk about. We have thoughts. I'll just leave it at that. We have thoughts. So that being said, hope you enjoyed this episode. Hope you tune in next week, and we'll see you on the flippity dippity.